Hello, this is Dana, and welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. This is Orchid Medley Chit Chat number 10 with a lot of orchid updates and a few surprises. Let's get started. So yes, we're starting outside today around the perimeter of the Orchid Hut. And as I get started here, I'm showing you my Dendrobium moschatum, a species orchid. But before I tell you more about this plant, and before we do the rest of the Orchid Medley Chit Chat, I just wanted to mention that it took about 30 to 45 minutes for the camera lenses to stabilize out here and for the condensation to stop. It's just that humid. We have had high humidity along with triple-digit temperatures for the last few days, and it's going to continue through the end of the week and into the weekend. We have also had Saharan dust in the atmosphere, so it has been hazy with pretty poor air quality. If you see a little bit of condensation still in the video, it's just because it hasn't completely cleared yet out of all of the camera internals and lenses and whatnot. Okay, so back to the orchids. This again is Dendrobium moschatum, species orchid, and it had what I would call a soft winter's rest under the grow lights in the house. It was too cold off and on for the plant to be outside for most of the winter, although it did spend some time in the garage with cooler temperatures. I haven't learned really how to grow this one yet. It is supposed to be a spring-summer bloomer, but what I have instead is a whole bunch of keikis coming along the stems. And from what I've read, if it is going to bloom, it blooms on the bare canes. But I've just got keikis like going on all over the place. And with good root systems, with really great growing root tips. So hopefully you can see that. And they're pretty much all over. They're at the bottoms of the canes, they're at the tall, tippy tops of the canes. And then there's even one on this really, really tall cane that still has leaves on it. So, you know, I'm still learning how to grow this one. If anybody has this Dendrobium species moschatum, and you've been growing it successfully and getting it to bloom, please let me know what you're doing. It might take me another couple of years to figure this one out. Okay, so the other news, I guess, about my orchids that I'll share is that I have lost 3 plants just within the last couple of weeks. 2 bulbophyllums and my epidendrum. The bulbophyllums, I think, were actually on their way out over the winter. For whatever reason, they just did not do well. And now that it has gotten hot, it was easy to tell that they were just not going to make it. So I have disposed of those. And then the epidendrum was the one that I repotted. It was in a pot that had a lot of algae, and I repotted it, and it was a little bit sad then, and it just did not recover. It just went downhill in a hurry, and that was that. A lot of people say that epidendrums are really easy to grow. I have not found that to be the case. That was my only epidendrum. Maybe I'll try them again at some point in the future. Okay, so moving on down the way here. This is maybe the part of the video that many of you have been waiting for. I had a community post about what was under my radiata leaf, and I do believe some of these have hatched. Okay, so it's a little bit difficult to hold the camera at this angle, so I'm going to back away and give more of a wide view here while we talk about what this actually is. And I'll start off by saying what's under this leaf is the reason why I do not indiscriminately just spray all of my orchids. If an orchid needs some sort of chemical treatment, I pull that one orchid and I take it into the garage and spray it and take care of it that way. I never ever just spray all of my orchids with anything. And the reason is because that particular situation under that radiata leaf is actually a beneficial insect to your orchid garden. It's a lacewing bug, and I'll put a picture of what it looks like so that you know what the adult looks like. But when it lays eggs, they are on little short silken strands, and then the egg dangles beneath that little silken strand. And they hatch within just a matter of days, but they eat other bad insects in your garden like aphids. So they are a good bug to have on your orchids. So again, the reason why I just don't spray everything, because it kills the beneficial insects as well as any that are doing harm. I kind of like my orchids to just maintain a natural balance. Rain showers come along, wash away things. Every once in a while I just give them a shower, and I try not to kill ladybugs and lacewings because they do help keep the population of bad insects down. Alright, so if you see this on your orchids, please don't douse it with alcohol or spray it or anything. It's actually a good thing. Alright, so let's just kind of move on down the way here. I'll show you one other bloom because I'm not going to do this one as a featured video. I can't take credit for it blooming. When it was shipped to me, it was already starting to be in bud. So let me just kind of zoom in here. You may not see this bloom again in any of my other videos. This is Brassolalia cattleya Solar Flare Paradise. Okay, and today is, well, it's not exactly watering day, but there are certain orchids that need attention more frequently than others. So every day right now, especially since it is so hot, I do come out and mist the tolumnias every single day in the morning because they do like that rapid wet-dry cycle. And then every other day I'm soaking all of my Vanda orchids in a bucket. So I have increased the frequency of that because of the heat that we're having. And even though it's humid, they do seem to want just a bit more water now that the temperatures are rising. So this is another smaller growing space that I have right by the door into the house. It receives very bright but indirect light all day. This is where my catasetum lives. It has grown into a massive plant. It needs to be watered and have the reservoir at the bottom refilled at least every other day, if not every day. Extremely thirsty orchid, but it's doing well. And then next door is my Burdekin Wonder Lakeland Cattleya type orchid. Let me see if I can zoom in here. I'm sort of reaching across a really large fern that you can't see on the bottom of the patio. I'm going to zoom in here, see if the camera can focus on that new growth. There it goes. So that's doing well. New root growth, new vegetative growth. That's great. And then up here, now these orchids have become a gigantic mystery to me. These are my Dendrobium Little Sweet Scent and Anosmum orchids, you know, requiring that hard, very a specific winter's rest, which, you know, I thought I did, but the results are bewildering to me. I think I told this story in an earlier video. They pretty much lost all their leaves, which would have been expected over the winter. They had higher light over the winter, no water, well, maybe a little misting every once in a while on a hotter day, but no water, no fertilizer. And then in early May, after the weather had been warm for many weeks, they were doing nothing. And I had decided to just go ahead and start watering them when they were inadvertently caught in a rain shower anyway, so they got watered. And then I just said, well, I'm just going to go ahead and start watering them. Well, after that rain shower, it was just a matter of days, and they started developing keikis along the bare stems. They were developing keikis on top of last year's keikis. And now pretty much it's just keikis all along the bare canes. And the other thing that's puzzling to me is that new cane growth seems to be somewhat stunted, stalled, not developing. I'm not quite sure what you would call it, but there's evidence of some new growth at the very base of the plant. However, it just doesn't really seem to be super strong new cane growth like you would expect for, you know, middle of June now. So I have a feeling that our growing season has been shortened this year. I know here in Southeast Texas it seems like we went from relatively cold winter into summer without a spring season. And the winter seemed to last a little bit longer than normal. And then it kind of just got hot. So I'm, expecting that our growing season is probably going to be anywhere from like about 4 to 6 weeks shorter. And I do not know what kind of new cane growth I'm going to get on either of these plants this year. All right, moving on now to some plants on the inside. Okay, so now the indoor portion of the Orchid Medley Chit Chat, where the weather is a bit more friendly. Quite a few things to show you today. Some are just orchids in bloom that you might otherwise not get to see. A couple may be featured orchid videos in the coming weeks, and just some interesting things going on with these indoor plants as well. So let me move a few of these out of the way so that we can focus on the one we're talking about. And I think I will do these two first. Okay, so this is my Phalaenopsis Young Home Sunkissed. I've had it in my care now for about a year, and even though I repotted it and it was adjusting to my environment, it did decide to put a bloom spike out over the late winter. And it's not a particularly strong spike. It did have the bud on the very end blast, but it does have 2 open blooms. This orchid does need to continue working on its root system so that it can be a stronger bloomer next year. So I will be cutting this spike off so that the plant can begin to focus on more root growth and some vegetative growth, and then hopefully next year it will have a bit larger bloom. And I'm still a bit undecided whether to do it as a featured video this year or just wait until next year. I'm kind of leaning towards, I guess, waiting until next year when it has a bit better of a bloom to feature. Okay, so that's that one. And then this is something I'm really proud of. This is my Neophonetia falcata, which is potted in the traditional moss mound. and it has its very first bloom spike with 3 flowers open, just as cute as can be. There is on the other side another spike with 4 buds developing. So as soon as the one on the other side opens, I'll do this as a featured orchid video. I don't know whether or not I will get both bloom spikes open at the same time, but that would be kind of nice. So we're going to just wait and see what happens here, and then I'll do it as a featured video. Okay, next up is an orchid that fooled me. This is my Tolumnia bahamensis, and gosh, 10 months ago maybe, it started putting up this spike right here, and I thought I was going to have my very first bloom on this plant. However, it was developing at the slowest pace imaginable, and now that it has developed a bit further, I don't think this is a bloom. I think this is another fan, and possibly this orchid sends up new fans on spikes that look like it could be a bloom. So I will have to research this one a bit more. If anybody happens to know about how this orchid grows, you could leave me a comment. But you know, it's doing well. It's been outside now for a while with the rest of my Tolumnias, and that fan has actually picked up growth, and as I was continuing to look at it, I just knew that was not going to be a bloom. It's just going to be another fan. So interesting growth pattern on this Tolumnia bahamensis. Okay, and then this orchid is probably just one you might not otherwise get to see. It's a no ID Phalaenopsis, but a really nice bloom spike, smaller blooms with a yellow lip. Really cute little orchid. This one I'm fairly certain has a lot of the former Dorritis genus in its background. It's that corn stalk shaped plant along with more narrow leaves, a bit smaller in size. You know, it's not as small as a mini, but it's not as large as a full-size Phalaenopsis either. I really enjoy having plants like this in my collection because they do not take up tons of space, but yet they still give you the satisfaction of having a really nice bloom spike with a manageable spike that has, you know, some smaller blooms on it that doesn't require just a ton of heavy-duty staking. So I just thought I'd share that one with you. And this one is the same situation. Probably a lot of Dorritis in its background, corn stalk shape to the plant. The blooms on this one are larger, but again, not as large as a full-size Phalaenopsis bloom. This is, again, just another no ID plant, but I enjoy it because it's yellow. I don't have a lot of yellow blooms in my collection, and the speckled sort of burgundy colored lip on this one is a little bit unique as well. Okay, and the final plant that I want to share with you in this orchid medley chit chat is my experimental Phalaenopsis, and I'll put a link to the previous videos on all of these as I talk about them in the upper right hand corner of the screen. But on this one, I have decided for sort of practice purposes to create a keiki on this older spike. So if you would like to know how to do this, I can do a video about it. Just leave a comment in the section below this video, and I'll see if there's enough interest, and I can make a video about how to produce a keiki on a Phalaenopsis and all of the ramifications of doing that, because you know, this plant is sort of set aside for a bit of experimentation. It's not my favorite Phalaenopsis, so you do kind of need to understand what you're getting into before you attempt creating a keiki on the spike of your Phalaenopsis. All right, so that concludes this video. If you enjoyed it or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and talk to you next time.